People have to choose. So, yeah. I think I'm going to kick off while people come in, and perhaps I can contextualize the discussion. I realize that we're at the graveyard shift, basically, the shift before lunch, and on the last day of the conference. So I can promise you I have to jet off to the airport, so I won't be long, and hopefully will be interesting too. It is a Friday afternoon after all. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. In preparing for the session, I reflected a lot around risk and resilience and households, and especially as the last 3 days has been a lot of talk about insurance. And the thing that I kept coming up to, many, many years ago, before my hair was gray, I was in Nigeria doing some work for a large mobile operator, and we happened to be in the field driving to Ibadan. And there had just been massive floods, and I had a research team with me, and we were looking at the use of mobile products in low-income households. And as a result of the floods, there was a dead body at the intersection as you get into Ibadan, and we were horrified. And the human-centered design researchers that I was with were particularly curious and asked, why is there a dead body? Why doesn't somebody pick up the body, said take it to a morgue, basically do something about it? And the entire community at the time came back and said, we cannot do that. Because once we take the body, we assume ownership of it. The family has to come and fetch it. They have been informed and they will come. So it has stuck in my head. And then a few years later, again, I was out in the field, this time in South Africa, in very rural South Africa, with the National Statistics Office. And again, we were looking at insurance, this time funeral insurance. And I remember going into a very rural home, and we'd asked about why they purchase funeral insurance. And the old lady there at the time said, well, when I cry, who will hear me? And that phrase is always stuck in my head. It's more than 15 years old. When I cry, who will hear me? And what she'd meant by that was to say, all my kids have moved to the big city. When I have an immediate problem, the only people that are going to help me are my neighbors and the people that live around me. So today's discussion, I have very few slides to contextualize this discussion around risk and resilience, around low-income households, whether they're in urban or rural areas. What does that mean, and how do we get to them? So the stories around communities, how they function, where they function, is embedded in an inherent social contract. The social contract for each community is different. How they function and the value systems that they hold are very different. But what is the common thread around that is every community has a social contract. The household is the singular unit of that social contract, and the value system starts from there. But it is upheld through institutions, formal and informal. It is upheld through the local community-based activities and how people choose to come together and live. So in thinking about insurance, which is inherently a community product, I think it becomes really important to locate it within the context of communities, its values, its institutions, and the social contract within which communities, be they in Asia, in Africa, in Eastern Europe, be they in a fragile context or non-fragile context, in a developed country or developing country, that social contract still exists. And as a corporate, trying to embed formal products in there without understanding that social contract and the institutions that are embedded in there, I do not believe that any financial services product will flourish. So that, for me, is the kind of first takeaway around this discussion in terms of understanding low-income households. By the way, all of the work that I'm presenting is embedded or is located within much wider bodies of work that I've written about, so you get the 5-minute because it's Friday afternoon. The second thing around the social contract, around communities and institutions, is households. Households, consumer priorities drive decision-making. So this slide, apart from its very cool colors, which was deliberately designed around the SDG colors, because I love the SDG colors, and the concept of the value system of the SDGs, is more than that. It is driven by a data set comprising 65,000 households. And what we then went and did is looked at the needs and usage of financial services that people choose to use. What we tried to do was base it on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with the underlying theory being people will choose to fulfill their most basic needs first before they go into higher order needs. What I found really interesting was that risk events happen, and households choose different mechanisms to build their own resilience. So healthcare events happen. They buy medicine. They pay for emergency health costs. They pay for funerals. They are able to cope with loss, crop failure, theft. So loss events happen, risk events happen, and this is based on real data, yet they do not have insurance. And the mechanisms that they are choosing to use right now is local community mechanisms. People are insuring each other. That effectively speaks to a fundamental failure of the financial services industry to be able to meet the real economic household needs of the low income. We're going to talk about a little bit on how there's some really new, interesting case studies coming out. But the question that I wanted to pose was, these things are happening anyway. The one thing that the Southern African region has been able to do really well was turn a life event in the form of the loss of a family member and utilize insurance and embed insurance into those households. That has not happened for healthcare, it has not happened for life, it has not happened for other household risk events. Why? I don't know, and I guess that's the reason we're all here today, to reflect on that, talk about it, and perhaps be able to build better institutional and market frameworks and structures that can meet those needs. And then the last one. The last one talks about a business journey. There's a lot of talk about product, there's a lot of talk about household needs, and there's a lot of talk about industry. But all of those things need to happen in the container of a business. And what I have found that happens is often the intervention only happens on one side. There's a new product, and there's a whole journey developed, but the business operations is not funded, is not built to take on board a new product. It's piloted, and it works in the 2 households that you try it, with the one project manager managing it. Your exco hasn't bought into it, your board hasn't bought into it, your funders have no clue what's going on. So ensuring that there's a business journey related to the new products, and those new products can effectively scale and can be embedded within the communities, within the channels, and within the household structures. So, enough from me. I'm now going to go to our panelists who can talk about the real things that they have done within this container of issues that I've put in, or the buckets, the 3 big buckets of issues that we've identified around risk and resilience for low-income households in the face of climate change. Andrea, I know that you have done really interesting things at WFP, and perhaps if you would like to talk a little bit around the Mozambique case study, what you've done around insurance and building value chains, I think that would be really interesting to unpack a model that's working in a country that's facing climate change and with a low-income market that is probably below low income. So over to you.
Thank you, Kemi. I will probably give a little bit of an overview of why do we do insurance, because effectively we have been working with insurance since 2009. And Mozambique is an amazing case where we have been able to showcase that our approach looks at integrating insurance as part of a broader set of financial services, but also as part of a bigger intervention that looks at fostering local value chains. So we don't see insurance just as a single instrument that can be promoted, but really needs to be integrated in those efforts. And well, WFP, our mandate is food security, and I don't know if you know, but a third of the food in the world is provided by smallholder farmers, and specifically in Africa, 80% of the food comes from smallholder farmers. So really, our mandate of food security is critical for that. However, we, as a humanitarian organization, we don't work in insurance just for the sake of it. They need to be sustainable over time. And this is why we have been really bringing together all these interventions that promote, for instance, the creation of markets with insurance, with credit and savings, in a way that farmers receive a package of support. In the case of Mozambique, what we did was precisely package insurance with savings, with seeds, and also with assistance that is providing and is guiding farmers to adopt conservation agriculture. So with this package, actually, farmers are improving the productivity and the resilience as a whole. It's not just a single instrument that is promoting the resilience in terms of shocks. So we are working in different settings in Mozambique. Mozambique is a country that is providing a lot of context in terms of private sector engagement. So for instance, we work with Hollard and Phoenix Seeds, which is a provider of seeds. And insurance is embedded in these seeds, and the cost actually has been integrated in the cost of the seeds. This has been a project that Hollard has been promoted already for a while, but what we decided is instead of reinventing the wheel, we tried to bring together all these partners. And what we have been seeing is that this approach is very appropriate for settings that might be more developed in terms of agriculture, and you can bring private sector to be very actively involved. So not only Phoenix Seeds is involved in this model, but right now, for instance, we are bringing partners from the cotton industry that are willing to support these interventions because they want to promote livelihood diversification of farmers who participate in their models. So they are also financially bringing some support so these models can be sustainable over time. Just maybe wanted to add something. Mozambique is an example of this approach that is very targeted for farmers who are part of value chains, and the input providers are not the only players that can play a role. Also buyers can play an important role. And actually, I don't know if you know, but WFP is a big buyer of products locally. So we are in 59 countries, we are purchasing the crops around the schools precisely to cater the needs of the school meals. And I don't know if you know, but 136 million children have been receiving meals at school thanks to these models. So we are purchasing crops from these farmers, and we are bringing insurance, savings, and all these packages so they can be productive and resilient.
Thank you, for making my little circle come alive in terms of how those local ecosystems and value chains are working. One quick question before I hand over to Hanadi. Tell me a little bit about the funding model for Mozambique. And for those of you in the room, Hollard is a large South African insurer, a private sector insurer, so the model is particularly interesting. Hollard being a private sector insurer, Mozambique is a really tough market from a private sector perspective. Many companies have struggled. Vodafone has never really been able to, as a mobile operator, get into that market and penetrate properly. So tell me a little bit about the relationship with Hollard, WFP, the seeds, and how you managed to get collaboration and partnerships with different players.
Yeah. So I think that Mozambique is a very good example of these public-private partnerships working very well and ensuring the sustainability of the scheme. So we as WFP, we bring capital that is brought from donors. But private sector need to be involved and interested in participating in the scheme. And we're just piloting a solution that we think that will be sustainable over time. And what we have been doing with Hollard and Phoenix Seeds and now with the cotton players is to show the business case, to basically create an investment case around this and showcase that insurance just is like the top of the, how do you say, la cerise sur le gâteau, the cherry on the top, to make sure that all of this happens well. So what is happening right now is that initially we started subsidizing the premiums of insurance, and even we were supporting financially with the provision with seeds. But over time, what happened is Phoenix Seeds realized that even for these beneficiaries that probably were not really their target beneficiaries at the beginning, it will make sense to integrate the cost of a premium in the cost structure of the seeds. And this happened because Hollard and Phoenix Seeds see the value of integrating insurance and building the resilience of the farmers. Also, I have to say that they are enablers that push a little bit this value proposition of insurance for Phoenix Seeds. So I don't know if you know, but in some countries in Southern Africa, seed providers, they need to guarantee the quality of the seeds. So they have seen that insurance actually could play a big role there, and this is why they are willing of integrating this. Just maybe to finish there, blended finance is playing an important role for us because we don't think that basically we see ourselves like the ones who are putting the seeds to make investable, let's say, these value chains.
I like the analogy.
So then you have private sector to have more appetite. So it's a little bit more sexy for them to come in. And this is what we're saying, actually. We put together an investment case for Mozambique, and we're looking at different players to try to bring capital, and we have a fund. I can talk about that later, but it's quite exciting.
Thank you, and I think it's a really nice spot for me to hand over to Hanadi, particularly around the business case, the funding models, collaborations, and partnerships. Perhaps I'd love to get your perspective around this building the market foundations for investment, and how do you work in really difficult contexts?
Thank you, Camille. So we at the Grameen Credit Agricole Foundation, we have a little bit of a higher risk appetite when it comes to impact and social investing. And we always adopt a blended approach. So we have the subsidy side, the grant side, technical assistance side that comes and accompanies institutions when we invest in them, especially when it comes to innovation and new products and the capacity building part within the institution. What I particularly liked about your last slide was this side of growing the business. So what we see usually in the market is that whether it's an investor or a private funder or a public funder, whoever, they fund the product development part a lot. We find a lot of grants, a lot of investments to fund the portfolio, to fund the product development side. We struggle a lot to find funds to bring this to a growth phase. And this is very critical in building foundations at any market. We cannot just do this and then leave them to build this together. In some markets, it's very doable. The institutions are more grown. The sectors are more stable. But when we talk about agriculture, for example, it's a very hard sector. And the example we always give, in any developed country, northern country, agriculture started thriving when it was subsidized. So subsidies is not a bad word, it's not a curse word, except that I don't know why in the sector, when we start moving to guarantees, we start moving to private investment, we think subsidies are now outdated. I think blended approaches are critical when we want to talk about insurance. Subsidizing the insurance fees sometimes is necessary. We've done, I will not call it data or studies, but we've not done a few surveys, most recently in Benin, where we found, we went to the farmers basically, and we asked the question with an insurance company and with the government, as with an MFI, and they are ready to pay to a certain amount. They don't want to pay more than that, even if they have the money. It's not a question of money, it's a question of value. When all of us think about insurance, we're thinking about the value we're getting in case of something happening, an incident. When you're working on a short-term cash management, you're a smallholder farmer, you don't think about when I lose my crop, what will happen to me immediately. You think about your children first, your household first, if you can eat first. So we need to do a lot of work to build this demand for insurance products. And so people, for funeral insurance in Southern Africa, for example, people understand it, they use it more. So if you want to invest in this and really protect our food sources, as you were saying, we need to adopt a blended approach. We need to have, I know it's a cliche word, but the very smart type of subsidies. So not subsidies because we have extra money we want to deploy somewhere, and it's earmarked for this country, so we just throw it there and hope it sticks. We need to really, really adopt an investment approach to subsidies. So for us, a grant is an investment, and a loan is an investment, and equity is an investment. So we invest in value creation for this market through the grants, and to build the foundations for this market. We invest in loans. We don't do equity a lot, but we invest in loans as well to help this market push it toward growth, and we invest in capacity building also to push the institutions to remain there and to build local and regional partnerships, because today we're here, next day we're not here. So that's the approach we adopt, and we will continue to do this. We will continue to advocate for this as long as we exist.
Thanks, Hanadi. Just, you reminded me of some data. I've seen data on financial inclusion, I think, across more than 25, detailed data, livelihoods data, across more than 25 countries. And if I have to think about that in the context of funeral insurance, if you ask a household, what are the top 5 risks or the top 3 risks that you face? Number 1 risk, death of a household member, and that's the primary income earner. Addition of another person to the household. So if someone dies in another household, you've got another mouth to feed. Crop failure, illness. And if I look at those things of what can plunge a household, what are the things that plague people on a nightly basis, that sends them to bed sleepless? These are the common risks. If I have to think about funeral as an insurance product, and part of the reason that it took off in the way that it did in the Southern African region was because of the AIDS crisis. When I was looking at the data, and this was about 8 years ago, maybe 10, the average age of a household member was 34 years old. Shocking, but true, because a lot of young people were dying from AIDS. That's gone up now. I think that's closer to sort of 50 plus. So they've managed to arrest it and stem that sort of, control the disease at household level. But this was a very real thing households were facing. And as a result, they were looking for financial products to mitigate that risk. If I have to go back to that list of household risks, things that have still not been taken care of through financial services products, crop failure, and I think that's getting worse with the climate crisis, because I'm seeing data that's coming out where more and more households are facing crop failure. Madagascar, vanilla, that was coming out, I think, in 2016, 2017, 2018. Households were already impacted by crop failure and vanilla crops. Malawi, I think, was the same. So crop failure still hasn't been taken care of. Illness. Illness, not in the sense of it's going to result in death, But I think COVID-19 has shown that you could have long-term illness where you don't have health care. So key mechanisms for financial services products that haven't really found a way to embed itself in local communities. And as a result, communities are finding ways in which to develop their own set of mechanisms to take care of that risk. So exactly as you said, Hanadi, at a kind of more macro level, when you look at it, these things are happening, and the kinds of business models have not caught up to the realities of households on the ground, which is where...
sorry, just to talk about the crop failure part. One reason insurance is not taking up, the insurance premium, the cost to the household cannot be greater than the cost of the lost crop, or equal to it, or the lost livelihoods. And as long as we try to adopt a profit-based approach, which is not also a bad word, profit is good, but we need to build the richness in this market, the money in these markets, at least some stability there, to be able to profit off them. We cannot go to a destitute market impacted by climate change and put premiums that will cost the household more than what they can borrow from a friend, for example. And that's a very, very important part where subsidies could be needed to start building the foundations of these markets.
I want to talk a little bit about that blending in the next round, but thank you for highlighting that, because I think that's quite an important part of the discussion. But I want to go right now to the third leg of the discussion around business models, institutional capacity building, and where institutions are at in terms of product offering. So maybe Sahana talk a little bit around how capable are institutions, how ready they are for selling a sophisticated product like insurance.
Thanks very much for the question, Kami. I think the level of maturity of an institution can be looked at in different ways, right? How close are they to their customers? How much do they understand the life cycle, the behaviors, the needs of the customers? How much are they on the ground? But you could also look, and in my field of work, how plugged in are they to the other stakeholders in the market? How do they work on building some of those, value chain connections? And also, when we talk about scale and business model today, you talked about mobile money and others, there is an aspect of digitization that is fundamental to the discussion of how much can it scale, right? But before scale, we have to try and develop, create, and try to kind of test out on the market what happens. So in terms of maturity, they could actually be anywhere, right? The important thing is to really understand what segment of population they serve and what are the actual needs in the market, right? And I come back to your point about, blended approach or, really testing something on the market to see that if we're creating that value, can it scale? Can it build commercial viability? And that takes time. Thanks to the Snoop project, we were able to do an 18-month project on the ground, which really needed different skill sets to bring together that capacity, saying the staff understand how this channel works, if it's a digital channel. We're developing a new agri-finance project. It required increasing the size of the loan a little bit, which is always scary. But then it required risk measures that went along with it to say, okay, this can actually work. So when embedding an insurance project into the seeds or into however we want to package it, who pays for it in the beginning, but what is the vision of who will pay for it at the end, and how is that sustainable? And for me, this takes a lot of time. And we talk about patient capital sometimes. I think we need patient assistance as well. It takes time to train people on the ground, train the leadership, build partnerships. I know in some markets we say, oh, mobile money is there, now it's been there for over a decade. We'll do a partnership and we can have a US status channel. It's not that easy. It took us 8 months to work with the mobile operator and the MFI to have a USSD code to make it work. There were some hiccups saying, okay, how do we get back onto the ground? Are the clients ready for it, et cetera, et cetera? There are different components that need to come together to bring that value, and then to show that business model saying that this can actually work. How can we bring it up more to scale? And then the next step would be partnership at a public sector level, I think, to really unlock the scale.
So I like the emphasis on patient. I think there's been so much talk about capital, and then we just lock the patient up front. Tell me a little bit about channel development, staff capacity building, training. Where are institutions on the ground at?
That's a very broad question. I mean, when we talk about institutions.
I want to say, where are staff on the front line? So somebody if you want somebody to sell an insurance product at an MFI or at a mobile money agent or at a post office, how much work, what needs to be done to get the person selling the insurance, not even the uptake, the person selling to understand what they're selling? What have you guys found in your implementation?
That's a big question, and it comes from me from top down to bottom up, and I'll give you some examples, right? A staff of a microfinance institution can be very frustrated that the institution is not moving fast enough because clients are coming in saying, hey, we want to use mobile. That is a case, that is a use case. And so there is this appetite, say we need to digitize, we need to, and then you have maybe some younger staff that are a bit more savvy, et cetera, to try and test it out. But we find that if the impulse doesn't come from top down saying, this is what the institution is doing, this is why we're doing it, we are digitizing as a whole, this is the journey. And if that kind of speech is not put forth to the field, it's very difficult. You can give all the training you want, it's very difficult to get that momentum going, right? So that is one big, from an institution perspective, I would say we need to have the right mindset at the field, but we also need the right impulse or the right messaging from the leadership. The next element is actually working with digital, even if it's a mobile phone, even if it's a small app, whereas before we were doing everything on paper. And that itself is a journey, right? How does it link up to the back office that used to do things a bit differently with paper and now will get information slightly differently? We were talking about credit scoring. You can put all the data together for a pilot and say, okay, these are the measures that we're going to take to, analyze a loan. But if that doesn't build up and it's not maintained, you lose all of that work because there was no, this process building between front, back, middle, et cetera, was not maintained, and you're not enriching the data in the database. So training can't be emphasized enough, I think. At the staff level, at all parts, leadership coaching will be slightly different for digital or a new product. There might be some coaching required as to why this is an important product or how will this make sense commercially, but also in connection with the client behavior outside. Is the client asking for mobile because they're all equipped, or have they not tried it because it's way too rural and that needs another step of educating the customer. And the part about maturity comes in when you try to make sense of this all, when you start off a project, saying, where is the pulse really at internally? Leadership, middle, front office, field officer, and where's the pulse at the client? Because we need both to work if we want to have a channel or a digital channel approach.
Thank you. I think the other thing that part of the reason I'd ask is for the better part of last year, I spent a lot of time visiting some very rural branches of the South African Post Office. And the one thing that I found was that at head office, the perception is everybody knows what our product set is, they can sell it. And I found that, and it may be my age talking, the old-fashioned things like manuals. Staff out in the field need training manuals. They need reference manuals so they can understand the product themselves. They know how to sell it, and they know what the product encapsulates. That's missing. The field training and skills development of staff themselves, sensitization, business operations, it's been a cost structure that's been taken away. Apparently it was considered fat in the early 2000s. And now we've taken the fat and the muscle and the bone away, so those things don't exist. So people are selling things in isolation of understanding what the field problems are. So if I have to think about at branch level what is happening, if you want to sell product at scale, all of these normal business operational processes that were considered normal in the course of running a business seems to have been taken away under the mistaken perspective that it's fat, but it's not, it's missing. So for me, further to what Sahana was saying is building up your channel capacity along the way with very old-fashioned practical tool sets. Be they on a mobile app or on a pen and paper. But there's been so much focus on the technology, there is no focus on the practicality of what's actually needed.
And to add another complexity is if you want to do partnerships, and you talked about post or everything, and you need somebody else to sell for you, the problem is just, compounded, saying, have I trained that outsourced arm well enough to speak the same speech?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So those are the kinds of, I don't want to say fat, but we've cut the muscle and the bone. You need to put all that back in because the body ain't functioning anymore. With that, I want to go to, Andrea, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your Ethiopia model because it's a different funding model. And then I want to go to Hanadi to tell us a little bit about what that blended finance looks like practically. Blended finance is another one of those words like patient capital, where I think this time the emphasis is on the blending and not the financing. Everyone's like, let's blend. I'm like, that's awesome. But we need the money in order to blend. So what does that mean? And how do we create the structures and understand what that blending should look like and what's needed for it. So Andrea first, because I like your model in Ethiopia. It's very different. Different markets, different models. So tell me a little bit about Ethiopia.
Yeah, and maybe to get to where we are right now, I'll give a little bit of history of how it started. So actually, we started working in Ethiopia with Oxfam in 2009, and the model was more targeted to beneficiaries who were more like subsistence farmers, and who were part of a national scheme of social protection that is called PSNP. And I think that it's very important to talk about failures in these conversations. And I think that over the years, we realized that there was a kind of a failure in terms of like the model, because we kind of decided to bring a solution that was more for profit, thinking that there will be some ability to pay from these beneficiaries in the mid and long term, and we cannot put our eggs on it. But the truth is that the targeting that we were focusing, and because of the program where we were inserted, the conditions for that were not very clear. So what we realized is that we needed to really shake the model and retarget completely. So what we did is like we realized that out of the caseload that we had in 2022, around 30% were part of food value chains. And then we started discussing with the government, and at that time with Pula, who are now also engaged in this scheme, is that actually we should change the model to beneficiaries who were more involved in food value chains and were actually receiving support from the government in a program that is called the input voucher system. And then we changed completely from like policies, if we could say. We started with social protection and we transitioned more for like food value chain support, agriculture support, smallholder support. And then we ended up working with ATI and the Ministry of Agriculture to develop a scheme that basically integrated insurance in the input voucher system. So now what happens is like every single person in Ethiopia who has access to inputs, they have access as well to insurance. And this is a collaboration that happened because we work with PULA, we work with other UN agencies, we work with JICA, and we were patient. I really like what we like building here in terms of this patience, because we needed to learn from that mistake, and we needed to like bring a different scheme because we were targeting different beneficiaries.
Yeah. Thank you, and I love that example. When I transitioned from the private sector to the public sector is easy. You come in, you have a bucket of money, you have a singular objective, and you go for it. And at some point, if you're doing something like a telco, you're like, well, I would be happy with 45% market share. And that's okay. You engineer for 45% market share, you build your business, and you move along with that. But the public sector is very different. Government does not have the luxury of saying, well, I'm only going to take care of 20% of my population. They don't even have the luxury of saying, I can only take care of 90% of the population. They need to take care of 100% of the population, which means that your issues are different, your funding models are different, and the way in which you reach people, because market segments are different, income structures are different, and you're dealing with multiple geographies, which means that your complexity increases. So I like this idea of when we heard the Mozambique story, it was a singular issue, really easy. You brought in a private sector partner, you brought in some seeds, and there are challenges. It is a tough to reach market, but it is containerized. Going into a large market like Ethiopia with a government partner, public funding, complexity increases. And you have to iterate, you have to think differently. So with that, I'd like Hanari's perspective around the money, because what that money does for different types of projects fundamentally changes. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around what that blending means and how it actually practically, what it means for practically working on the ground.
So if I want to be as practical as possible, when you want to invest in a certain market and you want this market to grow so you can invest more and attract more investments and make more money off of it, which is all fine, you need to ensure that the market is stable and exists. So at the first level, when we're talking about markets like agricultural markets and these low-income markets, you need to introduce some type of long-term perspectives to the stability that's created. And this cannot be done without different investment approaches, different technical assistance approaches, different lending approaches. So you can adopt like subsidized rates on lending. You can adopt different types of lending that's shorter term or longer term. You can deploy different types of technical assistance and grant funding. Sometimes the institution can do it themselves. Sometimes they need you to help them do it, etc. Every single context is different. But for the sake of our discussion now, let's assume contexts are very similar. The problem, the bottom line problem we have is that the problems that we're facing are compounding. So climate change is a big, big, big risk. It's really affecting people on the ground. It's really, really affecting people. So it's not like just a nice thing to talk about or a scary thing to talk about. It's happening. The problem is our approach when we do investments for climate change, for example, in agricultural market. We want short-term results for a problem that cannot be solved in the short term. So the structure itself between the investment and the reality on the ground is distorted anyway. We need, well, I would add not patient, we need to be flexible at this end. We need to think about how can our investment benefit this market so it can benefit us. Now the way we think is how can this investment benefit us and our reporting to our funders? And then we'll see how it benefits the market. It doesn't work this way. It will fail at the long term. That's why, as we were saying yesterday, we keep saying that we did not really advance much on the SDGs at all, because we're thinking short term, like a year term, for problems that require 10 years to be solved. For us to be able to start solving this, we cannot just fund the part that is the portfolio side of things. We need to fund the capacity building. I cannot stress this enough. I know I look like a broken record when I keep repeating this. If you don't have local capacity, it's not sustainable, period. It's not sustainable. It might not fail tomorrow. It will fail with time. When you're facing really like disasters, and I think there is a session this afternoon on disaster or war or something. When you're facing disasters or crises or climate change, like short-term crises, the institutions that are there are the ones capable to recover or to help the market recover. So if you spend time on building these institutions or helping them, listening to what they need, sometimes they tell you what Sahana was saying about having the buy-in from management, these people are not nobody. They know what they want, they know their market, and they know what they need, and they tell you what they need. When our answer most of the time is, oh, but we don't fund this, you're not adding any motivation. You're actually taking away motivation. They will either stop, they won't be interested, they might not be interested in the product. Why should I, as an institution, go and develop an insurance product if I cannot get any capacity building behind it? I'm not going to invest my own profits. My own profits are for my portfolio. So I'm not going to risk my own profits to risk a new thing. I need somebody to share this risk, to de-risk it for me, not only for the investor. So to be very, very practical, what we should try to do, and I'm not saying we're doing it, we're trying to do it, is really think about the investment side as a holistic thing. The investment has a grant investment, a loan investment. These are both investing. Now, how do we measure the value? That's another discussion. We create value, we create market stability. We need to think about how we measure the market stability, and then you will get what you want from your investment on the long term.
Can I just add to the
Sure.
subject of complexity, right? We want to add an insurance product to an agri product or an agri loan at an institution, yeah? And we say, this is, we have a loan and we need some assistance to do it. We need to scale it, right? Okay, so what are we looking at? First, the agri loan product itself. Is it meeting its needs? Can we improve on it? What does it need to have, to add insurance? So we probably want to look at a value chain that is actually commercial or working, right? So, okay, so we say, we'll develop this product, we'll see how we can add insurance to it so we understand a bit the insurance needs, the insurance market, because you need a licensed insurance partner most probably. And then you say, I want it to scale, so let's look at the digital channels or what's there in the market. And then you say, but if I'm doing all this, I need to manage the risk and I need to make sure that as a financial institution, I have my risks in place catering to this particular thing. And then you have, oh, but what about the processes? Because like I said, front, back, et cetera, we need to manage all of these things. And finally, how do we manage data, et cetera? All of these things are different expertise.
Yeah.
You can't have a risk manager training a front officer on how do you do app unless the risk expert also knows how to do that. And mobile money, management is very different. Insurance is a whole other different. So really the question is, it is complex. And so I do understand some parts saying, oh, but assistance, capacity building, we'll do 1 training, 2 trainings, and that's not enough. But ever more than before, I feel there is no funding model that brings all of this expertise together saying, let's try this out, and then we'll see how it builds capacity so that the local terrain is a bit more evolved for us to then build on it. So it's a real question. I don't know how to answer it, but we faced it first time. And what was very interesting in the technical assistance we did with the SNOOP program is that the funding, the assistance allowed for a recruit of a project manager within the institution. So it was not the consultant managing the project, which had its challenges, but was very well thought of, saying that project manager then will carry on this project beyond the consulting period, which itself was quite long, right, 18 months. But if you can capacitate someone to be accountable to manage the project, that itself is a big win as an asset for the institution then to go on and maintain and build upon. But the projects are not easy, and so it really begs the question, how do we actually move these things on the ground?
So, sorry, can I
I'm going to
just-
give you
okay.
2 minutes, and then I have to go to audience.
Yeah, no, just like building up on this, because I think that this is where international organizations play an important role. Because the work that, for instance, organizations like WPO, UNDP, ILO, etc., do is bring the capital that we have from donors precisely to build these local capacities that we think that are critical, so these markets can build up. So in the case of Ethiopia, with the capital that we got, for instance, from KfW, we managed to create like a whole institutionalization, if we could say, with the insurance industry and ensure that they learn about the product, that they see the value of it. We also work with VSLAs, with MFIs, with different cooperating partners, so they could effectively put together the little toy alive, we could say. Without that, I think that would have been impossible. But this is where the money that we have from donors and from different sources at the beginning to put these seeds are very important.
So we've had a lot of time to give you our perspectives. I'm going to open it up to the floor and perhaps online as well. So I will take questions for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Oh, there's a hand up there and another one down there.
Hi, good morning. Thank you to all the panelists for your insightful contributions today. My question is for Grameen. Sorry, my name is Tara. I work with IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. So I want to know if you could share an example of a smart subsidy for the insurance premiums that you've used, and in particular, if you could share any success factors, anything that contributed to making it sustainable. Thanks.
And there's another one. We'll take them in batches of 3. There's one down there and another one here.
Hi, I'm Ed Jimenez, the chair of the Microfinance Council of the Philippines, and at the same time, the president and CEO of a fairly large microfinance NGO. Basically, my question is, the top 5 or 7 microfinance institutions in the Philippines are looking to establish a private-led guarantee corporation. Why is that so? I think as in other countries' jurisdiction, when it comes to the guarantee, the government is so slow to implement, and other institutions are finding it hard to access the guarantee. I think I heard some of you talking about the whole idea of the farmers not being helped, or the whole idea of not being given access to really good, sustained access to credit. My basic question is, are there, from your end, both as an academic and then from a donor's perspective, how do you look at it if the practitioners themselves, the microfinance, the large 5 microfinance institutions, all private-led, are going to establish their own private sector guarantee corporation? And are there models, so to speak? Are there existing ones who are in either from an SRI, socially responsible investors would be willing to go, or are there donors who are into it? I mean, we're trying to look at it because we have a deadline among ourselves. By the end of the year, we want to register it and see to it by the first quarter, we'll be able to partner with the government or with a commercial bank. But we're finding it hard to get some existing models. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Judah Jamal. I'm from Daman for SMEs, Palestine. I'm wondering, in agriculture, we have 3 kinds of problems: natural, political, commercial. In the examples you are mentioning here, you are insisting about insurance. And I think something very important when you mention about the private sector. We talk about insurance, I think this is a business of the private sector more than like grants or support. But when we talk about climate change and disasters, and you have some kind of problems with the farmers about the climate change, you have to have your government to compensate those kind of natural disasters, not any kind of grants. My proposal is we are trying to give an example about if we do microfinance, how to think about credit guarantee fund, because we give a loan to the farmer, and this farmer, he's sharing or working in a very high risk area, like political or commercial. We try to compensate in case this project was defaulted. This is the idea, to differentiate between three issues in agriculture: the private insurance, the credit guarantee funds, and also the disasters or the problems that naturally happened and damaged the agriculture projects. This is an issue we have to tackle it, and not to talk about insurance as a general, which I think it's the most work of the private sector more than grants or support from governments. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Hanadi, do you want to take the question on from IFAD? Andrea, do you want to take the last question now? And I'll take the one on Philippines.
Thank you for the question. So when we're trying to say smart subsidies, I'm not saying it in the old meaning of smart subsidies, like let's go do projects that need subsidies and, and then it stops and go. What we meant by smart subsidies, what we discovered, is that the more you work with the institution themselves before you give them the subsidies, the better. For example, I'll give you a very good example. So in Uganda, for example, we wanted to work on the refugee issues with 3 partner institutions. And we had a blended approach. So we had the loan side and we had the technical assistance capacity building side. The way we built this was based on their own budgets, on their own needs, on their own motivation to expand. So we did not impose the expansion. We did not impose the outreach. We did not impose how many people they will put there. We did not impose how they will operate on this. So we had one partner who decided to use a certain product to go and reach this population. We had another partner who decided to recruit refugees to make it more efficient and to reach to the communities better. And we worked within their own budget, so we built this with them. I'm not saying that this thing is doable for every single funder. No, of course, sometimes. But we should have a value chain approach to funding. So the funders who cannot afford to start working with every institution to build this, the budgets for the capacity building and the technical assistance, so the subsidy side of things, can do it with a partner. So partnerships are important. So they partner with somebody who is able to do it on the ground. Because the more it's embedded within the institutional strategies, the more they will take it forward. So the result of us putting a lot of the groundwork to work with the institutions in Uganda resulted in those institutions expanding beyond the outreach of the project itself. So we got really compounded and very good results. And after the project ended, so we were talking to them and they're like, oh, we're continuing to work on this market. We're fine. So that's what it gets. It really stays there and it really builds the internal willingness and motivation to move forward. While if we go and do a project like supply-based project approach, so we have this fund, we'll give it to you, and these are your conditions, and they will give you what you need, 50% women, 5%, I don't know what, etc. The moment the project ends, they might not be motivated to continue working on this specific product, whether it's insurance or anything. So that's what we mean by the smart work with the institution when we talk about the smart subsidies from our side.
I'm going to do, Sam, let me take the Philippines one, and Andrea will take the Palestine one, and then I'm going to go to you for online, and there's one on the floor here as well. And then I think we're going to have to close. In terms of the Philippines, I have to confess it's not a market I understand, because it's a market that operates in really interesting ways. And models that have worked in Philippines tend to not work anywhere else. So that would be my first confession. That I don't understand it. But what I can do is give you some reflections on South Africa, where the private sector has often stepped in where there's been, I don't want to say market failure, but a policy or regulatory vacuum or an absence of government leadership. And I think the financial inclusion story in South Africa is a particularly good one. South Africa started its financial inclusion journey well before the global donor community came on board. It was in the late 90s, early 2000s, at the dawn of democracy, when the banking sector decided that they needed to go to the low-income market. Government came on board later and mandated bank accounts. And honestly, it was called the Mzansi account, that is it. And you had to, so then government created some structures around, but it was the banking sector itself that took the initiative. They put together an association called the Bankers Association of South Africa. They focused on low-income bank accounts. They created the mechanisms, the rules, the regulations, and handed that to government, who then took the leadership of it. So I cannot give you an example, or I cannot validate whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but what I can say is when the private sector is organized enough and takes on the initiative to enable a conversation with government, they definitely have the dedicated expertise. They have the benefit of speed. Because it's the private sector, it's lean and mean, and it has the ability to move entire segments and to move markets. So then you have the ability to engage with government in a meaningful way. So I'm sorry I didn't answer your question, but I do hope that it's given you some thoughts for consideration.
Okay, maybe on the last question, I think that we cannot expect that insurance is the single instrument that will manage climate risk or any risks. So, for instance, at WP, we have promoted an integrated approach for climate risk management when actually credit guarantee funds are promoted. So, for instance, in this example that I presented before about Ethiopia, what we have been doing is like managing climate risk at different levels. We have been like unlocking access to credit, and we have been doing that, promoting or bringing capital to Rusacos, and credit guarantee funds have been like critical factor to allow that. So that's something important. Then, of course, you have to bring the capacity of Rusacos and VSLAs, for instance, so they can absorb the risks that are not transferred through insurance. So I think that important message is that we cannot expect that insurance will manage all risk. We need to bring different financial instruments together. We need to bring different mechanisms to unlock access to finance to the different financial services, service providers that are locally. Maybe just wanted to complement a little bit on the smart subsidy, because I think, very quickly, it's about the exit strategy, and I think that is very connected with Hanadi was mentioning. And this exit strategy can be connected first with the value proposition that these partners see on insurance, and that they accept that they be willing to pay for insurance in the mid and long term. And that could be a local government, that could be an input provider, that could be a buyer, that could be the government, that could be whoever it could be. And then the second one is building the income availability, if we could say. So those who are participating in those value chains can pay for it. So I have very quick two examples. In Senegal and Guatemala, we realized that by unlocking access to savings and credit, the communities who were part of these VSLAs were able to contribute to the premium. So now we have models in those two countries where they are contributing almost 90% of the premium already. So we are not subsidizing anymore, right? Because they have managed to absorb that.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to say that everybody is around, and if they're not around, guess what? It's the digital world. You can contact them to ask them as well. And that's the point of digital, right? To be able to speak to each other. We're going to go to online questions, and I have one from Pranav on the floor.
Yes, we've got a question from Marcelino from Good Neighbors, who says, can you provide, from your experience, a good model or best practice, even in a middle-income country, where a climate insurance bundled with microfinance schemes matching with complex nationwide climate resilience efforts? So that's, yes, a model or a best practice where a climate insurance is bundled with microfinance with complex nationwide climate resilience efforts. That makes sense.
That's the only one, right?
That's the only question for now.
Okay, excellent. And Pranav? And then I'm going to close. Sorry. Okay, go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
So just in light of the multiple risks for low-income agricultural households as highlighted by the chair in the opening remarks. Thanks, Sam. So in light of those risks that are faced as highlighted, the embedded with seeds example of Mozambique, what risks does it particularly cover? It'll be good to highlight. And in the Ethiopia case, the FISP model in Zambia has been functioning. So any differences or good parts of that? And what happens once the KFW money is subsidized through WFP, once that subsidy is over, how does that program look ahead? Thanks.
Cool. So do you want to take the one on from Good Neighbors?
Yeah, I mean,
that's a hard one, but
that's
an excellent
a very,
one.
very hard question. I don't pretend to know the answer at all. But what I would say is, I don't know of any model of best practice that combines the three, but we need to be careful when we talk about insurance. Insurance is linked to a product, not to an abstract. We cannot say climate insurance. It's either agriculture or crop or health or something. You cannot insure yourself against climate. So we need to be very deliberate when we're not advocating, when we're talking about investing in these sectors, and be as specific as possible, because this is how you can test and measure and understand if this product is, you know, succeeding or failing or working or not working. And then based on this, you can build those best practices. I don't think we have models of best practices yet, but we have models of good, maybe it touches a little bit on the subsidy, good practices that started as subsidies and then moved into the subsidy reduction. The examples you gave on Senegal and Guatemala are one example where it's smart to do it this way, and it's a good practice to end up, you know, stabilizing the market, sustaining the market sustains itself, and you can just phase out.
Thank you. Quickly, Andrea.
Yeah, well, I will start with the risks. So in Mozambique, we're covering excess rain and drought. And in terms of like the parallel between Ethiopia and Zambia, I think that, well, first of all, in Zambia, the focus is more on social protection. So FSP is a social protection scheme. And, but what is very similar is that they are packaging like different services to farmers, and it's not only inputs, so that's different. In the case of Zambia, they are bringing credit, they are bringing technical assistance. There is much more comprehensive, I would say. And maybe connecting with the online question, I think that this is a very good example in terms of like bundling credit with insurance, because it's really one of the biggest success in terms of these models. What happens when the subsidies dry up? I think that Zambia and Ethiopia are very good examples as well. In Ethiopia, after showcasing the model to the government and to the insurance companies that actually created a consortium after this, now the cost is embedded in the input. Yeah, so now there is no more subsidy. The cost is embedded in the input, and for the case of Zambia, the cost is being absorbed by the government. So this is like a little bit how these transitions happen in practice, I would say.
That's a smart subsidy.
Yeah, exactly.
So with that, I promised you we would end on time, and I promised you would get to lunch and Friday afternoon drinks. So I want to say thank you, and I think the key takeaway or my reflection on this session and perhaps the discussions over the last 3 days around risk resilience and financing is so much of the investments made by development finance has already reached traction. I feel like listening to Hanadi, Sohana, and Andrea, all of them had excellent examples of what has worked. We know what's not working. And I feel like we're on the cusp of the next stage of growth. But that's going to require a little bit of brevity, but more than brevity, it's going to take a logical, structured, methodical approach in order to leverage the investments that have been made. So I want to say thank you for listening to us, but we are around in life in general, wherever we may be in the world. Reach out. I think this is part of the start of a conversation. And thank you for having us.
Thank you. He's been, as you can see, annotating the work in real time. So please do come up, take a look at it. I think we will be making it available online as well, but please come and a round of applause, because I think that's amazing. Thanks.